Welcome to this session where we will be taking a look at how CorPeuM can meet the needs of cash forecasting. For any business to survive and grow, it must have three things. First, a clear understanding of the market in which it operates. Second, an effective business model that determines how value is generated. And third, adequate funding in the form of cash. Typically, much of the cash will initially come from investors or provided as loans. But as the business becomes established, that cash will come from existing operations. Therefore, the ability to accurately forecast cash and manage the way in which it is used is essential. The profit and loss view of a business is okay in terms of how the finances are working out. But to make day-to-day operational decisions, it's vital to know whether there's enough cash to carry them out both now and into the future. In the scenarios shown on the screen, the traditional P&L view is the same, but the cash flow that results from each is very different. You can see the reason for this if we expand scenario 2. It all depends on when customers pay for their purchases, when materials are ordered and suppliers are paid for their goods and services, when cash is paid to employees and other vendors, when loans and dividends are repaid, and finally finance charges due to non-budgeted cash deficits, which have a direct impact on the bottom line of the organisation. What is needed is some way to view budgets and forecasts from a cash view that could ultimately lead to better timing of decisions. To do this requires many different kinds of information. Take the example of a manufacturer or service provider. Forecasting cash starts with sales entering forecasts by customer. This forecast is compared with current resources and any under or overstock situations being noted. Next, those responsible for the supply of products and services review the current manufacturing or resource schedule to make sure there's adequate stock of raw materials. Some dialogue may then be required between departments to optimize the organization's ability to serve customers, for example by delaying the delivery of a product or service or increasing production. Once agreed, the cash inflow can then be predicted by referencing individual customer payment terms. Where additional raw materials or external services are required, procurement will then need to order from one or more suppliers depending on availability, price and payment terms. Once settled, the cash outflow from external suppliers can then be generated. To this information, other cash consumers will need to be added. This will include operational departments, financial obligations to investors, and agreed interest or loan repayments to banks. By combining these flows, a cash forecast can then be generated. Out of this, cash may then be put aside for future investments, or where cash shortfalls may occur in certain periods. These processes are not one-time events. They need to occur on a continuous basis where actions between departments are carefully coordinated so that everything that makes up the forecast is done in the right order. Once we have this data, the real power of a cash forecasting system is that it allows management to answer a number of key questions. Questions such as, can we fulfill the sales demand? Do we have enough cash to make changes to production and the purchase of raw materials? How do customer and supplier payment terms affect the availability of cash? And how does this differ from what we had originally planned? By closely monitoring cash in this way, organizations can be sure to make the best use of a scarce and expensive resource. Now, unlike most systems, CorPeuM has three capabilities that enables the flow of cash to be modeled simply and easily, as we're going to see now. First is that CorPeuM holds data as a series of logical data models, each being specific to the data that's available. In this case study, this includes collecting weekly sales forecasts by customer and product, holding customer and supplier payment terms and price, holding the levels of stock for both product and raw materials, and finally we have information on departmental expenses and finance charges. This logical view is exactly the same way in which you set up a CorPeuM application. Next, CorPeuM is able to combine these data models into reporting models, which can be enriched with calculations and new analyses. For example, in producing a cash forecast by referencing customer and supplier payment terms. Finally, CorPeuM has a sophisticated workflow capability that controls what data is to be collected and the order in which it's to be combined and processed to produce a range of reports and analyses. In our case study, there are 4 distinct processes. Initialized forecast sets customer and supplier payment profiles and the current status of material and product stock levels. Much of the data is loaded from production systems and based on current estimates and production schedules. The second process, collect forecast, collects sales forecasts and matches them with the current stock and production levels. Departmental expenses are also collected during this process. Now we have all the data, the third process, adjust forecasts, allows management to make changes to production to meet any shortfall in product stock, which is then used to calculate any additional raw materials required. Raw material stock levels are then shown against the revised forecast, allowing management to make adjustments to raw material purchases. The final process, generate reports, creates two reporting models from the data supplied, one with a complete P&L and the other a cash forecast. From these, reports are run that show a complete profit and loss and cash flow statement, along with the stock levels of both raw materials and finished goods. Reports also compare this to an original budget to show where variances have arisen due to changes in product mix and underlying costs. So let's see these processes in action. I don't have time to cover how the complete application was built, but I'm going to show you some of the main components of CorPeuM. To start with, let's take a look at the building blocks of data and reporting models. Now I've just logged into CorPeuM, where my role is that of an administrator, and so I can see all the components that built the application. Let's take a look at the business dimensions used in our case study. These are made up of mandatory dimensions, these are shown in grey, that every model must have, and those that have been defined by the organisation to suit their particular needs. One of the standard dimensions is the calendar. Now CorPeuM employs a true calendar, one that recognises how days make up weeks and months, and when holidays begin and end. These calendars can be customised to specific organisational needs that allow data to be collected and reported according to both local and group accounting schedules. Another standard dimension is the organisation or departmental structure. CorPeuM can handle multiple structures. It can also handle multiple versions of the same structure. As the structure is defined, CorPeuM can record the effective dates of any structure, that is, the dates as to when its position was established and finished. This can then be used in reporting to show how results have been affected by a change of structure. Now everything I'm showing you here is the same for all dimensions. For the metric dimension, we organise accounts or measures into groups, which makes it easier when setting up reports or data entry screens. For example, these are the accounts that make up the profit and loss. Similarly, these are the accounts that make up the cash forecast. And so on. So we define the accounts as they make up particular schedules, which again makes it easier when we want to collect and report data. These standard definitions are then assembled into data models. These are used to collect and hold raw data and are defined to match the data being collected. Let's take a look inside the operating expense data model. Here we can see it's made up of just the mandatory dimensions. But if we look at the sales forecast data model, we can see that as well as the mandatory dimensions, two custom dimensions have also been defined for holding customer and product details. Now all data models are multidimensional in nature, as we can see if we look inside the finance details data model. Here I'm able to browse through the dimensions and members. I mentioned earlier that CorPeuM uses a true calendar to which all data is attached. To show you this, I can open up the year 2012 into months. I can then open these months into weeks, and finally these weeks into days. These days recognise the days of the week and months and are used to work out what data gets reported in which months. The next thing we're going to look at are the reporting models. These combine data from one or more data models and can have a totally different structure from the data models that feed them. When setting them up, for example the cash forecast reporting model, we define what dimensions and members they are to have, and whether there's any currency conversion to perform, as well as the source of the data. CorPeuM then works out how to combine them, to which calculations can be added. For example, calculating the interest due should a bank account be overdrawn. These rules are English-like and can contain logical as well as mathematical operators. CorPeuM has its own reporting system, where reports are created from one or more reporting models. Here are the reports that we have created for the cash forecast case study. Let's open up the profit and loss report. Here we can select the characteristics of the report, as well as where data comes from. Again, we don't have time in this session to go into any detail, but just to let you know that a full range of charts are supported, and reports can be combined into books that reflect the latest results. Finally, we're going to have a look at CorPeuM's workflow capability that controls how data flows between data and reporting models, as well as when reports are generated. Here we have a range of activities that have already been defined. Each activity accesses predefined types of work. These types include data entry, copy and delete data, allocations, as well as moving data between data and reporting models. Activities can be grouped into specific processes, as we can see here in the forecast sales process. The activities shown here have a defined order and can be set deadlines, as well as an approval process and escalation procedures should it not be completed on time. So let's see these processes in action. This first process initializes the CorPeuM model by deleting results from prior runs and loads the current stock positions. I'm going to start this manually, but it could also be scheduled to start automatically on a particular day and time, or on the completion of another task. As an administrator, I can check on the status of the task by selecting the Running Processes menu. Here I can see the task that has been scheduled along with their status and any deadlines that have been set. Some of these activities load data from files, while others provide a data entry screen to capture the information. In the case study, I've arranged for all data entry tasks to be completed by myself to make it more simple to understand. Users are notified by email when they're required to do something. All they have to do is access their to-do list that is automatically populated by the workflow engine. Here I can see I have 4 data entry tasks. The first is to set supplier details. I'll just open this up now. This allows me to update price and payment terms by material for each supplier. This screen is intelligent in that it will only display the materials available from the selected supplier. Once complete, I select the Submit button. In a typical application, this may then go through some form of approval process, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to show this today. This next task is to enter customer price and payment details. This screen is again intelligent in that it only displays customers that are specific to the region entering the data. This is achieved by using CorPeuM's attribute capability that allow members of one dimension to be specifically associated with another. This data could also have been loaded directly from an existing customer payment system. Here we have customer data for the Asian region, and finally we have customer information for the European region. Now all my tasks have been completed, my to-do list is empty. So let's go back and look at the status of the complete process. You'll see that this has now been marked as completed, along with a date and timestamp, which brings this process to a close. Once the initialized process is completed, the system can now be used to collect forecasts and compare this with production. As with the initialized process, I'm going to start this manually. This process has a number of activities that I can view on the interactive timeline. The process starts with each sales division entering a weekly forecast of the units to be sold to customers. Following this, the system will then show whether there's enough product stock to meet the forecast, after which all departments will then be required to enter their other expenses. Again, I'm playing the role of each sales division. Hence, when I look at my to-do list, I have a data entry task for each. So let's open up the first one. Here I can see the data required, and as before, this entry screen is intelligent enough to know what customers belong to my region, and so only those are displayed. CorPeuM has some shortcut widgets for entering data. In this example, I'm going to spread a single value evenly across the cells marked. The wizard also supports the breaking down of a high-level target to more detailed products and units based on a number of criteria. Once I'm happy with the data entered, I can either choose to save it and then come back later to modify it, or I can submit it, and at which point I'll be locked out of making any changes. I now need to enter the sales forecast for the next region, but in the interest of saving time, I'm going to fast forward the case study to where all forecasts have been submitted. I'm going back to the timeline, and I can see that the process has moved on, with the next activity being to review the stock situation. I can do this by going to my to-do list and opening up the report that CorPeuM has supplied. Here I can see the latest sales forecast and where there are any shortfalls in the current production schedule. I'll be able to revise these figures later on. Having completed this step, CorPeuM then moves on to collecting operating expenses. Each department is given a data entry screen that shows the latest forecasts where they can adjust the data. This information we'll use later on to create the cash forecast. When it comes to finance, they have additional information to provide. As I open this up, you can see it has a very different layout. And in this case, it requires me to enter interest rates that will be used later on to calculate bank overdrafts. Well, that completes my set of activities. Now, if I look at the timeline, it also completes the forecast sales process. The next process I'm going to show you allows management to make adjustments to the current production plan. As before, it consists of a series of tasks that are distributed to various people around the organisation. With these, they can make changes to the volume of product stock to be held, and can review any additional raw material purchases that will be required. The first task in my to-do list is a data entry screen where I can review product stock. This shows me how the sales forecast impacts the levels of stock held and highlights where forecast stock levels will not meet demand. In response to this, I can make adjustments to the volume to be produced. Behind this screen, the system is working out the impact of these changes on production costs, as well as calculating what levels of raw material stock that need to be held. The revised total of raw materials required each week is now displayed and compared with the current levels held in stock along with any that are on order. This is achieved by referencing the product material detail model for each product that needs to be made. This screen then highlights any shortfalls, which I can adjust to meet demand. Again, behind the scenes, CorPeuM is working out the cash implications of these orders based on the supplier's payment terms. Well, that brings us to the end of the adjust forecast process. The last thing I'm going to show you are the reports. These are taken from the P&L and cash forecasting reporting models that are generated as a result of the previous processes. Rather than run them individually, I'm going to display these as a book, which includes all the individual reports. These reports were set up within CorPeuM and access the models that have been adjusted throughout today's session. The first report shows a standard P&L view of the forecast, which was created by combining the sales forecast data, the revised product stock and supplier forecast information, and the departmental operating expenses. This report can also be viewed by individual department, as well as at the total company level. However, the security system will ensure that only authorised people will be able to see the content. In this next report, we can see the cash forecast that results from the same data as shown in the P&L. Here our attention is drawn to any forecast negative cash balances that will occur, together with the finance charges that result. We've also shown the fluctuating cash balance as a line chart. The next two reports are reports we've seen before. The first is the resulting product stock position for each product made. And the second relates to the raw materials that will be needed to generate that level of product stock. The sales analysis report shows a chart of the sales forecast by region for specific weeks and contains a gauge that compares the total with the sales budget target. Let me just zoom out on the screen so you can see the supporting detail that's shown below the chart. In this next report, the forecast profit and loss is contrasted with the original budget. A variance column is provided, which highlights where differences arise. This report can then be used to drill down to a departmental level, as well as to the sources that make up the figures shown. In this final report, the cash forecast is also contrasted with the original budget, and a variance shown at the bottom of the report. The closing balance is then displayed as a line chart. Reviewing this may well trigger a rethink of day-to-day activities to ensure that cash is effectively used. Well, that brings us to the end of this short session. In it, I've tried to give you an idea of what CorPeuM can do in respect to cash forecasting, and how its unique architecture sets it apart from other CPM systems. In summary, CorPeuM is a complete single solution that supports the complete CPM cycle of strategic and tactical planning, financial planning, forecasting, management reporting, and risk management. Next, CorPeum's multi-cube architecture enables it to model any data involved in managing performance, whether that be budgets, forecasts, strategic initiatives, performance indicators, or as we have seen in the case study, customer and supplier payment profiles. CorPeum employs a true calendar to which all data and structure is attached. This means CorPeum can report data using multiple calendars, as well as being able to associate results with any structure that may have been in operation at the time. Next, CorPeum is process-driven. All interaction with the system is through a sophisticated workflow capability that controls when and how users supply and review data. All users need to do is to access their personalized to-do list, while administrators can view the status of any process on an interactive timeline. CorPeum keeps a full audit trail over changes to data and structures, each of which can then be used when reporting data. CorPeum has its own reporting and charting engine that can take data from any data or reporting model. It has a unique block system for defining report content, which greatly simplifies the creation of complex reports. CorPeum controls all user access to both data and processes through an intelligent passport system, which controls what users can see and what they can do within any process. Finally, CorPeum is available through a low-cost monthly rental solution that is a fraction of the cost of other vendors. Together, these differences provide organizations with a powerful, low-cost, low-risk solution for all their performance management needs. To find out more about CorPeum, do get in contact with us via our website. Here, you can download the case study we've just been through as a white paper, as well as read our blogs written by some of the world's leading experts on performance management.